Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Sermon, and I'm thrilled to have you here today with us on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those who want to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to take different life cycles and we're going to explore them financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not about the money, but they're about your emotions that are associated with your finances. We are going to be relatively general in our discussions, but we would love to hear from you and make it more relevant and more personal for you and your situation. So please, you can call in or you can leave or reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post your comments and your questions on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the other platforms that you might be listening and watching the show. Today, I am actually super excited for our show for a couple reasons. The first reason is today actually marks 2 years that we have been broadcasting the Financial Wellness Hour, which I am very grateful for and thankful for all my guests and my producer, CC Schatz, who has made it all happen. The second reason is our guest for today, because I think today is such an important topic and one that is so easy to lose or not understand how to go through a divorce and even beyond your divorce. We too often make a mistake. We get caught up in life and we move on. How we could have done something better, how we could help others avoid the pitfalls that we have incurred, often don't even hit our radar. Andy Heller is the author of Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. And that is really what the book is about, is kind of paying it forward, learning from the lessons and helping others. By the way, including yourself is a major win to begin with when you're talking about compassion and when you're talking about self-care, as we are all too ready through the divorce process to beat ourselves up. We are not very compassionate. We don't take care of ourselves too often. I think even the title there alone is a lesson for us, let alone the many other lessons that are in the book. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour.
First, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited.
I also have to thank you for waking up probably before the sun today, being on the West Coast. So thank you for that as well. And you're awake, which is even better. So
yeah, I had a cup of coffee, but you'll need to talk to my wife a little bit later, but we're okay.
So I will speak quietly, not wake up more. But you do have a passion and a drive to share your message. And that comes from your personal journey, which I think, when there's a personal investment in this, it makes it such a stronger kind of passion to get that message out. I'm going to ask you to share just a little bit more of your story and your drive and your strength so that people really understand what's behind this book.
Thank you. I'll try to do that in a very short couple minutes so we can save the rest of our time for our discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I had my own divorce, and a counsel of mine basically said, "You got a lot of drama going on, Andy. Why don't you find a therapist that you can check in with once a week or so while you're navigating through your divorce?" Now, first, I consider myself to be a very reasonable, Dale Carnegie influenced, compromise-oriented guy. Always have been the type of a glass half full person. But, it wouldn't hurt to have another voice in my ear. And I found a therapist, and she had done a lot of work with divorced men. So there's two key points that influenced me actually writing this book from this experience. So I cannot count how many times I would go into her office and say, "Hey, this is happening, but I got this, I thought it through, and this is what I'm going to do." She would listen to me and say, "Andy, I'm happy to hear that, but you're not going to do that. You're going to do this instead." So, and I would watch how she just completely destroyed what this responsible business owner decisions, what I came up with, and came up with a completely different suggestion, and how reasonable it sounded when it came out of her mouth, and how wrong I was with my own thought process. And the second thing, and that happened countless times, Hirsch. And the second thing is, a lot of times things would happen during my own process. And she'd say, "I got a book for you." She'd go to her bookshelf and say, "Go order this." Go to the bookshelf, go order that. First, I don't sleep a lot. So particularly when you had a lot of drama going on. So I was I read a lot of books, and I did a lot of the things that she suggested. And after about a year later, I looked at the divorce process, said, you know what? There's a gap in the book space. First of all, you have a lot of great books written by attorneys, written by therapists, written by co-parent counselors. We need an objective, unbiased assessment of the divorce process from just a divorcee, okay, and kind of a best practices for how to get through the process. And in the final, with all the books that I'd read, there was nothing quite like what I wanted to put together. So in short, divorce is an experiential journey. And during this journey, you're going to do some things wrong. You can do a few things right. You're going to not do a number of things mediocre. And the challenge is that you need the lessons of what to do on this journey on day one, not day 200, 300, or 400, so that you, your spouse, and most importantly, your children can land in a healthier place. So the theme of my book is 46 tips and strategies of issues and challenges and obstacles that most divorcees will encounter along the process. And I arm the divorcee with these on day one so that he or she can land in a healthier place because they have this knowledge. They have the mistakes, the person in the ear on day one, not day 200, 300, or 400. And, my book has just been released. So I would say that the thing that I'm the most proud of is that I write this as a businessman, and I bring a lot of businessman's influence into how to get your deal done. Okay, you and I were talking about this before when you and I met, how to communicate, and you use some business skills in communication. Right. But what has been the biggest compliment for me is the therapy community has really reviewed my book and just said, this book is different. This book really stands out. It can be a roadmap. And if you're going to read one book, this is what you need to read. So anyhow, so that's my story, what brings me here to talk to you and your podcast today.
So I think there's a couple things that you brought up that I just want to touch on, reiterate, or maybe expand on. One of them is, this is a very emotional, personal experience. And having that other voice in your head, because right now you got probably 10 already and they're all biased, it's so important. It really helps you in staying true to yourself, which is very important, but also staying true to the course of where you want to end up. And that's one of the things that I think is so important. And you talk about a little bit in your book, that structure and where you want to go, having that strategy. Another thing that you mentioned that's so important is, because it is such a personal journey, sometimes we think nobody understands. I think being able to read a book by somebody who it's not quite the same journey, but has gone the journey you have or very similar, I think that alone is very, very helpful for people, because that's one of the biggest, for me, I'll tell you, when at the beginning, I was like almost embarrassed to tell people. And then I realized there really are a lot of great people out there to be able to talk to or get advice from. Now, you got to put it in your own personal situation, but getting that advice as somebody who's been down that road before, I think can be quite invaluable. So, I mean, the reason why did you write the book? I think you've covered that a little bit. A little bit on what is different about the book being the personal experience. Anything else that you think becomes or is unique from that perspective of, I pick up this book and this is something I'm going to get that kind of no other book gets, Yeah,
well, I think I would say I could give you 7 or 8 different answers. What a lot of the early readers in the therapist community have commented is that my book gives very simple, easy to read, concise tips. Every one of the 46 different strategies has at the end of it a takeaway point. So, okay, because look, you're going to sit there and read a 3-hour book or however long it takes you. You're not going to walk away and remember the entire thing. And you need it to be really simplified and structured in a manner that can be easy to digest. And you don't have a lot of time when you're getting divorced. Everybody's not going to be like me where you don't sleep but 4 or 5 hours, So if you can only read one book and need that one roadmap, my book gives that. I would say the second thing I would highlight is the fact that I am a businessman. So what was my role in creating this book? Okay, this is not Andy Heller's guide to how to get divorced, because who nominated me and said that I'm the expert. But what I did when I put this together, Hirsch, is I met with countless divorcees who've landed in healthy places. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? I interviewed countless therapists, experts in their field, children's therapists, personal therapists, parenting coaches, co-parent counselors, attorneys, and it was their counsel that got taken and organized into a best practices book. This is my third book, but my other two are about real estate investing. So this is book. So I'm less the author and I'm more the organizer in chief of these tips and presenting them to the divorcee for one purpose: to get them, their spouse, and most importantly their children, to a healthy spot as fast as possible. Because it's so vital that you have this guide, because like what you were saying before is we are not operating at our best. And I'm going to come back to what I said earlier. I was amazed when I met with my own therapist, how often I was off. And the conclusion I came to, Hirsch, is that I was so emotionally compromised during those years that I was not able to think optimally and rationally. And people need that guidance. And a lot of us don't recognize we need that guidance to land in and navigate through the process. And that's hopefully what I'm trying to do here with Take the High Road.
So in your experience here, and by the way, the multidiscipline input is also so important, because sometimes we, as a divorcee, you may go through this process and work with an attorney and work with a financial coach like myself, or a therapist, or divorce coach, whatever. Having it almost like a team, and you can build a team that speaks to each other with people, or taking the advice from the book that is multidisciplined in its approach, I think is a very, very important thing, because they do overlap, all the disciplines, and they need to be put in together with a succinct view forward, as opposed to looking at them independently and running 3, 4, 5 different lanes versus really being one. I think that's a very big thing that comes from this book as well. But what would you say are some of the common mistakes that people make when negotiating their divorce?
When negotiating, I would say there's two big mistakes. People go and they hire an attorney. Hopefully you hire a good attorney, all right? And you expect the attorney to guide you. It's actually the other way around, okay? You need to guide your attorney, and that's your responsibility. And your attorney can do a better job for you if you are the rudder for your attorney, even though you're challenged, but you've got to guide. So what do I mean by that? It's also the answer to your question. One of my strongest pieces of advice in the negotiation phase is the word focus, okay? You need to get out a pad and pen and write down 2 or 3 things that you want to achieve, and everywhere else you compromise. It's your responsibility to go to your attorney and say, these are the 2 things that are really important to me. Everything else, let's give my spouse what he or she wants. I want to compromise. I want this done in under this amount of money. I want this done in 2 months. Okay, these are things that you need to give to your attorney. Okay, you don't want to be that family that sadly we hear about, where the college savings for the children was spent with divorce attorneys. Right. You don't want to be that family that's arguing about the kitchen set that you didn't even like in the first place. And it's your responsibility to help avoid that by being focused. Figure out the 1 or 2 things, and again, the shorter that list is, the better. You cannot be more than 3. 1 or 2 is great. And I'll give you an example. So we can make this simple. So you're getting divorced. Neither of you have new partners yet. There's been no third party in the divorce. Okay. So you recognize that at some point we're both going to start dating again. All right. Well, let's say I own a business in St. Louis. All right. And I don't want to be in a position where I have to be separate from my business. Okay. So you put in a geographic component. You tell your attorney, okay, here's what I want to be as generous as possible in my settlement, but the settlement is tied to if one of us wants to move more than 15 miles from the center of St. Louis, then at that point the numbers can be reset. In other words, you can never say the person is not allowed to move, but recognize the fact that your ability to be an involved father or an involved mother is geographically based on your business. So if your former partner ends up meeting somebody and falling in love in a different city, you don't want to be in that position, or at least you want some control over that.
Right.
So recognizing that, recognizing, okay, another example is, look, I'd rather give a bit more money, but I want more custodial time. So you tell your attorney, offer more, but I want to be an involved father. I want to be an involved mother. So two things ideally, compromise everywhere else, and that will help you get your deal done and save you cash.
So it's interesting because we've spoken about this earlier, was about prioritizing and knowing what your priorities are. You call them focuses. We spoke about my approach of prioritize, organize, simplify. You really got to understand what is important, because everything else is either clutter or it's used to negotiate. I think part of it is people are very unfamiliar with the process. They don't know what the future looks like. They scared, am I going to make it financially? The logistics about how do I create a new life? These are all things that are real and they play on people. But the bottom line is you are responsible for your divorce. A divorce attorney has 30 to 50 clients at any given time. They're going to give you the time that's appropriate, but you may not be the priority when they've got 30 other people online as well. So it really is your responsibility, and communication is so key. As you said, get them the relevant, proper information that they can negotiate best on your behalf, because otherwise they're shooting in the dark, and it's a little bit of a crapshoot, really, as to are they going to hit the right spots or not if you don't, the right numbers, I guess, with the analogy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a little bit, that's through the process. What are some of the things maybe beyond the process? The divorce is final. What are some of the common mistakes that people make there?
Well, I think that, one of the biggest is they, just like my own story, some of us don't recognize how damaged might be the wrong word, how impacted we are, okay? Or how we're not operating, how we need some help, okay? So the recognizing the need for resources to help you is and not availing yourself of those resources, Hirsch, I would think is the biggest mistake. And if you don't have the right people or the right ability to get counsel, you're going to make mistakes, and your children are going to suffer, you're going to suffer, and your spouse is going to suffer. Examples of that are getting a therapist for yourself, getting a kid's therapist. These kids need a therapist. You're not qualified to be both the disruptor and the counsel for your children. And we talked about this, and one of the things, reasons why I was looking forward to today so much is what you do is I actually speak about this in my book. So a household splits in two. In a normal household, one of the spouses is, I'm the better cook, I'm going to do more of the cooking. I'm the finance person, I'm going to manage the books, okay? You got to take an inventory of what things that are handled by your spouse so that you can, when you split up, you can go out and find a guy like Hirsch to help you with your accounting. Take a cooking course, okay? So recognizing areas where you need some help is essential, okay? The other big challenge I see, particularly in the first 1, 2, or 3 years, if you have children, okay, the emotions are raw, but you still need to co-parent effectively. And that is probably about 20% of my book is on communication tips with your former spouse, and communicating effectively, communicating in a manageable way so that your co-parenting can be effective when you guys are simply not able to function well together. That is very, very challenging. And I try to give some tips there, and recognizing you guys need help, and you're not.
I'm going to be a little rude. I'm going to ask us to keep that for after the break, because we do have to take a break, pay some bills. But I just want to say some of the things that you've said are just so important, because we don't, and we're emotional. We can't really see beyond the divorce so often. We can't, sometimes we're not even sure how we're going to make dinner tonight, let alone think about what's going to happen later. The earlier you start preparing, the better it is, because when that divorce is signed, you can't start thinking about how am I going to live the rest of my life. You got to get in your groove way earlier than that. You've got to understand, how am I going to cook? That was actually my biggest fear, by the way. When I got divorced, was I was going to starve my kids. I never cooked, ever. Or how am I going to manage my daily finances is another very, very important one. But you don't want to figure that out the day after you sign the divorce. You want to know, now that I've moved out, I need to be able to be competent, Yep. And there is a huge void that happens afterwards, because whether it's walking on eggshells, whether it's preparing and putting all this time, emotional time, as well as real time into the divorce itself, now there is a void, and you should fill that with whatever you want, right? And I'm going to say, maybe I should say, anything healthy that's positive and brings you joy, as opposed to anything you want to do. My first blog actually I ever wrote that got picked up was called "Divorce is Awesome, Right?" Which, from a marketing perspective, is great. It's a little insensitive. I get it. I did change the name to "Perspective is Everything." But I run through exactly what you're talking about here as well. A lot of the pieces and identifying. And then the last thing I'll just say before we go to a break, divorce is the first chapter in the rest of your life. It's not the last chapter in this part of your life. And that's not just a book analogy, that's very real. The way you go through your divorce, and we're going to speak a little bit more about this after the break and get more into the content of the book, but the way you go through your divorce and what it is will really set up the rest of your life going forward. And a big piece of that is how you're going to have a relationship with your ex, I think, as well. So before we do go to break, Andy, how can people get in touch with you so that they can learn more or, get the book?
Well, on the book, there is ability to reach out to me both directly and through my publisher, just at Take the High Road. So that's probably the best way.
Okay. And then on screen, but I will say hellerandy@gmail.com, HELLERANDY@gmail.com. And we will be right back. Thank you.
Thank you, Hirsch.
Hello and welcome back to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This is the Financial Wellness Hour. I am here with Andy Heller, author of Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and for Your Family. And I'm going to just recap a couple of the things. We covered a lot. I mean, just starting with a little bit of your story and how you came to writing the book, and how you read a lot through your divorce, but really it didn't hit the mark for a lot of the things that could have been helpful, and working to fill that niche with what you've put together, which I think is incredible, because too often it's a professional that writes that book, which is good information, but it's not always somebody who's walked that journey with you in the same way. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. So we did speak about the genesis of the book. We spoke a little bit about some of the common mistakes that people make, communication, understanding your role in the divorce, if I can put it in a little bit of a different way, and that it is your responsibility as you go through the divorce and the outcome in many ways. Some of the mistakes that you make after the divorce, being able to have structure, being able to plan. We spoke a little bit about emotions. I have said to every single one of my clients, as well as probably every third show of the last 2 years, that emotions can be the most expensive part of your divorce. And I firmly believe that, and I'm not just talking about sometimes extremely high fees from professionals or anything like that. It is often the emotions that make those fees go so high. So I'm not sure I did justice to the first half in my recap there, but it is some of the major pieces that I was able to get down and be able to read my handwriting, because sometimes that's a difficult one. Andy, you were talking a little bit about communication, setting up kind of an approach or thought on how to interact with your ex. Clearly, things haven't worked out. That's why there's a divorce, whatever that reason is, which means often there is not the best of communication. But I'm going to ask you to share a couple of your favorite tips in general from the book, if you would.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is right down my alley. Remember, as I said, everybody, I'm a businessman. Okay. And I'm I used to be a volunteer instructor at Dale Carnegie. I'm a Dale Carnegie disciple, which really gives also some business practices, some best practices that people take into the business world and human relations. So one of my favorite tips, Hirsch, is in communication section. Okay. And, so there's a dynamic in a lot of high conflict divorces, particularly right after the divorce when emotions are raw, where you have a situation for a period of time. The time could be a couple, 2-3 years, where you say right, she says left, you say up, he says down, and recognizing whatever suggestion comes from you is going to be rejected, and seeing that that's not successful. That's step number one. Okay, now, so I'm in this situation. Things are raw. And again, this is why reading this book and having a plan. And so when you encounter these situations, you've got a strategy is really helpful. So now you're seeing that here I am, and no matter what comes out of my mouth, my former spouse says the opposite. Okay, so, but how do we accomplish co-parenting in this environment? One of the business tools is to change the way you're communicating with your ex. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the tips is don't ever tell your ex what your preference is. Change your communication by simply, instead of saying, hey, little Johnny doesn't want to go to karate, I think we should send him to basketball. You speak instead in terms of problems and allowing your former spouse always to own the solution. Little Johnny doesn't really want to go to karate. I'm getting complaints in my house. I bet it's happened in your house. What do you suggest? Answer comes back. Maybe it's 2 or 3 steps towards the solution that you want. Say, I really like part of that. I still think we have a problem. Here is the problem. What do you suggest?
Right.
And again, I'm not offering ever a silver bullet. It's like there's no one suggestion in my book that's always going to work. But changing the way you communicate, allowing your former spouse to always own the suggestion, and then at some point you can try to push towards your preference. but you're changing the texture of your communication in a measurable way. This is a business tool brought into divorce. And this is one of the tips that I'm hearing back from those that have got the book when it was first out and said, I can't believe this, Andy. This is really working. So another example is use what's called a time card. Okay. Again, if you're in a high conflict divorce, the fewer things you have to deal with, the more the temperature comes down. Right. So when issues arise, you put them into two buckets. Logistics, I have to engage my former spouse right now, or something's going on with little Susie, and we need to make a decision in 1, 2, or 3 weeks. I'm going to push this down the road.
Right.
That's effective because and there's two benefits of using a time card, particularly with children. Some issues solve themselves. So you don't even have to deal with this issue with little Susie because a week later it's off the table. And the second benefit of the time card is that we human beings, we make better decisions if we take our time. Okay. So by segmenting the issues into two buckets and is pushing as many things down the road, you will find on those items issues that you're delaying, engaging your former spouse, you're actually going to be able to make a better decision. Right. Those are a couple of my tips that
it's so interesting you say that because but before I went out on my own, I was in corporate America. I actually ran a division for a small company, and I came to the realization very quickly when you get the team that you're managing to have input into that solution, they buy in so much more, right? Even taking out the conflict of the dynamic of divorce and the up and down that you were mentioning, just the fact that they have input as opposed to being put upon them, they're going to have a lot more buy-in and energy around making that successful, right? You also, I think, are de-escalating the emotional side of it by getting that input and getting that, the deriving the solution through their input. And often, they getting that credit or perceived credit, if you want to call it that. So it makes a lot of sense taking those kind of approaches and getting it in, and just covering a little bit of the overview of your book, because I think it's important people understand as well. I've worked with clients at all stages of divorce and beyond. And I see how beneficial it is to have like a structured approach to your divorce. And I'm not talking rigid, I'm talking structured. Have certain steps that can be loosely managed as you go forward, but really understanding, as you said, having your communication, having your priorities down, your focus. So sometimes you're going to need a professional to guide you. Sometimes picking up a book like this is a great guide and being able to extrapolate from this as well. So I like the way you put the information down. It's a logical, easy way to follow it as well. You start with structure and strategy. Makes a lot of sense, right? I need to think about how am I going to approach this? What are my priorities? What am I willing to give up is the other piece to that, right? Of being able to put that in. You write about taking care of your kids, of the children, which is vitally important because sometimes we're so scared about ourselves, we almost forget about taking care of those kids, right? And they are important. Incorporating your needs, which we spoke about earlier on how important and how we tend to beat ourselves up, not celebrate our wins or, incorporate self-care for ourselves. And then the healthy interaction with your with your ex. And again, the way you go through that divorce, if you are a jerk about it, you really think that you're going to have a great, healthy interaction with your spouse going forward. Or you mentioned you're not dating someone now. 6 months, a year later, you might be. You want to spend time, go away for a weekend. What are they going to say when you say, can you take the kids? They're going to say no, right? Setting it up from the beginning is so important. One of the other things you put, which I like, by the way, and finding your groove is not an easy thing, but you speak about those 10 golden nuggets at the end, towards the end. And those are not easy, I will say. But what I liked about those, and not just those, was when you read through them, you realize, yes, they are vital to go through a divorce, but they apply to really all areas of your life, right? So I'm going to ask, can you talk a little bit about a couple of those maybe as well? Because that will have people read all the way through the book to get to it, hopefully.
Sure.
But I thought there were some interesting things there as well.
Yeah, I have to pull out the book here.
Oh, sorry. I mean, while you're doing that, you've spoken a little bit about therapy. I'm going to ask you to say, and by the way, I could not imagine anyone going through such a stressful period in their life. I wholeheartedly agree. You need therapy, and you know what? Your kids struggle too. Their world is being shook up as well, and getting them the right sounding board, the right people to work with, is very, very important as well. So, any therapy suggestions, if I can say, in your book that are unconventional wisdom, so to speak, that are not found in others, before we get to the nuggets?
That's great. Yeah, and I'll give you one of my favorite ones. And this came from an interview with a brilliant children's therapist in California. So I'm not the first person who wrote a book and say it's really in your children's interest if you can get your kids in therapy. But there's a timing component that's optimal too, Hirsch. So what she suggested, her new process is, she, whenever it's possible, requires the family, whose parents split into two households, to get the kids in therapy. Ideally, it's not always possible, 3 to 4 months before they're given the news. Why is that important? Because if she's just given the kids when their world has already been disrupted and blown up, the therapist is automatically in damage control. He or she is going to be trying to repair, and at the same time is building the trust and and they're not going to have a foundation with those children. Versus meeting the kids, just tell the kids, look, we're going to do therapy. They don't even need to know why. They're kids. They send them there. The therapist gets a foundation of trust with the children, so when they're given the news, the therapy can be far more impactful to allowing these children to land in a healthy spot afterwards, Hirsch. So
a healthy confidant, which is not an easy thing to find.
Yeah.
You're going to have that right person and that right fit. And sorry, I know I'm interrupting you here, but I just want to point this out. Sometimes you go through 2 and 3 therapists before you find the right one. If you are announcing the divorce, disrupting the world, and now we got to figure this out and find the right one, it can take months, as opposed to already have the right people in place.
Yeah. So on my golden nuggets, some of my favorite ones are, I'll give you a very powerful one. Be generous. Be as generous as you can be, whether that's with custodial time or finances. All right. If you're a man and you've been the primary caregiver, all right. So and your spouse, she has traveled with her job, and so let's say the children are used to being alone with you. Don't be a jerk. If your spouse has been a good mom when she's been in town and she can make her business changes, and the children, be generous. Give her the 50% custody if she wants it and she's a good mom.
Right.
If you're the provider and the primary provider of the family, and the numbers that you have to pay are typically formulaic. It's based on the number of children, how long you've been married, how much you made during your marriage. Okay, but if you can afford to give a bit more than the formula to allow the households to be similar, do it. Now, it may not be appreciated right away. Do it. Another key, one of my nuggets is no parenting plan, no MSA.
I like that one a lot. I thought it made a tremendous amount of sense, by the way.
Yeah. People often put parenting elements within the MSA. I recommend an actual parenting plan that's included in the MSA that's been written not by the divorcing spouses, but it's been written by a co-parent counselor with the input for the divorcing spouses. This will help ensure that the parenting plan is far more detailed, and covers things like making sure that the dad gets the kids on Father's Day, the mom gets the children on her birthday. If you have a 2-religion household, the wife gets the kids on Hanukkah, the husband gets the kids on Christmas. These are things that you often don't think about when you're divorcing.
Right.
There might not be an issue because you've lived under one roof. It's good. They're going to be an issue. Another piece of advice, a favorite advice I got from a co-parent counselor who helped a couple draft an MSA is she finds that divorcing couples often look at the MSA rigidly, particularly when it's in their advantage. She said that's completely the wrong approach. The MSA is a framework. It's kind of like the Constitution was written. How many amendments have we had to the Constitution, guys? Right. Because the founders didn't realize all the things that they might be missing. I recommend looking at the MSA the same way. It's a framework. And the more flexible you are with your former spouse as issues arise post-divorce, even if you're not getting appreciation at the time, it's the right approach. You're going to feel good about yourself. But typically, the rewards of you being generous and more flexible, even if it's not being reciprocated, those rewards will be reaped at some point in the future.
So I got to tell you, just talking about the MSA, I think everything you've said is spot on. Have not just a legal person read the MSA. You'd be amazed at how many times I've read an MSA and just looked at it going, you're going to incur $45,000, $50,000 in taxes because of this. Or, somebody will say, you're going to refinance the home in 60 days. It's not going to happen because a mortgage company wants 6 months worth of maintenance, or what used to be called alimony payments. Have the right discipline, like a finance person, whomever it is, read those sections to make sure that they really are going to happen. Or the way they intended to happen, because there are a lot of things that happen without. The other thing is, as you said, some things are completely unpredictable. This whole thing that we had with the stimulus money, just bring it to the finance side of it. The advanced tax the advance that they gave on that last year, what havoc that wreaked with some of my clients, but those are unpredictable. So having the flexibility and understanding, as you said, this is a framework to work with, as opposed to this is the be-all, end-all, never gets modified, never gets compromised, never gets anything. It's a difficult route to take and live by that for the next 15 years and maybe even 25, depending with how you structure kids and, college and all the rest. So I think what you said there is spot on, and really understanding that. So I think leaving the other 8 as a teaser when they buy the book will be great as well, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you can get on Amazon and other bookstores as well, but Amazon's probably often the easiest for people at this stage.
Yeah, it's Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Target.com. The book's available in a lot of physical bookstores, but everywhere online.
Great. And I would recommend reading it. I have read it. I was fortunate enough to be sent a copy, and I think there are some great ideas in there. And as you said, they're easy to understand, and you can read them and just, kind of tomorrow start putting some of the stuff in practice. I just suggest with everything, think about your situation and how you're going to bring it in, that it makes it more effective from that perspective as well. We do have to wrap up. One more time, how can people get in touch with you? And then we got to really wrap up the show.
Sure. If you get the book, there's ways to get in touch with me directly and through my publisher. Also, you gave my email earlier, hellerandy@gmail.com. I have no problem to hear from people. The parting words I would say is that just attending a resource like this podcast, you're on the right path, everybody. And you're already following some of the tips that I have in my book is recognize areas where you need some help and go get that help. And that help can be Hirsch, that help can be these podcasts, that help can be a great book like mine, that help can be a child therapist for your children and a therapist for yourself. And if you are a little bit, show a little bit more humility and recognize areas where you need help, that's going to accelerate getting you to a healthier spot afterwards.
And so important. Put it's a hard thing to say, I need help. It's an important thing, though. I agree 100%. Andy, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and experiences, not just on the show, but obviously through the book, because that will help many people. Your insights are going to help people avoid so many pitfalls that you and myself have had as we went through our divorces, which will allow them to focus on the things that they should be focusing on. After all, you kind of only get one chance at going through this divorce when you're going through it. So please do it in the best way you can. I am Hirsch Sermon, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. You can reach out for questions for myself or Andy Heller, my guest today. Thank you, CC Schatz, for all that you do behind the scenes and for 2 great years of this show. I look forward to everyone joining me next time on my show. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much.